Okay, hi everyone. Thanks so much for joining another EdSurge webinar. We are just really pleased that everyone could be here again. My name is Noonoo. I'm the K-12 editor here at EdSurge, and EdSurge is a news and information resource helping bring you the best in education technology through our news stories, our research programs, our newsletters, and our community activities, which include live conferences and events such as this webinar. And at the end of last year, EdSurge joined ISTE, the International Society for Technology and Education. And ISTE is a nonprofit organization that serves educators interested in the use of technology in education. So for today's webinar, we have a great lineup of speakers to talk again about the impact of coronavirus on K-12 education. And we'll be focusing specifically on supporting educators as they transition to remote learning during today's discussion. A quick note before we begin, this webinar will be recorded and the recording will be made available to you via email after the live event. If you signed up for the webinar, you'll also receive updates about recurring webinars on this topic. And we plan to host them weekly for now, but we may switch to monthly at some point. You can ask questions through the webinar using the Q&A feature in Zoom, and we'll bring your questions into the discussion as we're able. We also encourage you to use the chat to say hello and share resources, but please do put your questions for the panel into the Q&A. You may have heard of the recent rise of Zoom bombing lately, which is why we made this. We put a password on this. So we do anticipate that this is a protected discussion, but if for any reason we have to disable the chat, we may opt to do that. And before we get started, I just wanted to draw your attention to a guide that we have from ISTE and EdSurge called Navigating Uncertain Times, How Schools Can Cope with Coronavirus. And that's collecting all of our stories, our contributors, and some really helpful resources. So I encourage you to take a look, and that's at readiness.edsurge.com. And there's also a new site from ISTE and a host of other education groups called Learning Keeps Going. And that also features tons of resources, including an educator help desk so that you can get questions answered. And that's online at learningkeepsgoing.org. So I'd like to introduce the panelists on today's call. And I'm so honored that they could share their time and their expertise with us on such short notice. And today we're joined by Kyair, the Baltimore City School Teacher of the Year for 2019-2020 for sixth grade literacy. He teaches sixth grade literacy. Michele Eaton, the Director of Virtual and Blended Learning at the Metropolitan School District of Wayne Township, and that's in Indianapolis. Dominic, Caguioa, the Instructional Leadership Support Coordinator for Los Angeles Unified School District, and Sophia Mendoza, the Director of Instructional Technology Initiative at the Los Angeles Unified School District. Thank you again so much for being here. Michele, I'd like to start with you. Can you tell a little bit about your district, Wayne Township, and tell us how you've been supporting teachers in the switch to remote learning?
Yeah, so again, I work in the Metropolitan School District of Wayne Township in Indianapolis. We have about 17,000 students on the west side of Indianapolis. As far as our district goes, we have some unique challenges moving forward. We're not one-to-one across the board. We do have some issues with access for all of our families. And so as we began the shift to emergency remote learning, I think the first thing that we did to support our teachers was to make sure that we were all on the same page. So it was really about getting all of the departments together at the table, creating those guides, making the decisions as much as we could in advance. You know, we went from basically nothing to completely remote learning in about 48 hours. So it was getting everybody on the same page there. And then now, as far as support goes, our whole team is working diligently to provide lots of formal and informal professional learning. So we are doing 3 to 4 formalized professional learning opportunities every single day online, open to any of the teachers across the district that are interested in attending. And that's everything from basics like how to use the LMS to online teaching, pedagogy, instructional best practices. And providing that wide range has been really important. We have in our district a really rich history of online learning, but still with a district of our size, or any size really, there's going to be teachers across the whole spectrum. So it's about that, and then providing as many avenues as possible to be available for support, whether that's through direct messaging and Hangouts, email. We've really involved our technology assistants in every building to filter some of those messages. So we've each kind of taken on very specific support roles.
Yeah, that's great. I'd like to just ask Sophia, LAUSD is such a big district. You have so many teachers. How do you go about supporting that many teachers in such a big district?
Well, I'm glad to hear we're not alone. Thank you, Michele, so much for sharing lots of the challenges that you're experiencing, because we're experiencing the same challenges as well in LA Unified. Currently, we support just under 25,000 educators, classroom teachers, and then when you add the additional leadership support, our principals, our executive leaders, directors, we're looking just at around 40,000 educators. So pretty much the same. We did launch our instructional technology initiative about 5 years ago. Different types of opportunities for our various learners. But I really resonates really well with what Michele said. We really had to just look at what we had. And we, thank goodness, we had a really strong, robust catalog, not only in our Office of Instructional Technology, but within our Division of Instruction. We were already leveraging technology for our adoptions of our textbooks. We have adopted a learning management system, so a lot of the strategies and systems have already been in place. So making the transition, yes, it has been like, again, I love what Michele said about this emergency remote learning. Everyone coming together right now to see what is it that we already have in place that we can make sure that our educators, we can provide them with something that'll meet them where they are on this continuum, so that they feel comfortable where they are. And it's been a mixture of both synchronous and asynchronous learning. We really found that our educators in this time wants to still be able to connect with someone live, be able to ask them questions in real time. So we've been able to create a catalog for our continuity of learning that does provide those various opportunities, everything from English language arts, mathematics, the arts integration, computer science education, as well as the ISTE standards for students. So we've been able to come together as a division and really try to meet the needs of all of our educators at this point.
Yeah, that's great. Dominic, can I ask you, have teachers needed a lot of tech support, or have a lot of tech support related questions, or have they been pretty autonomous in learning all of this technology and the ins and outs of remote learning as you've been going along?
Hi, thanks for that question, Stephen. Good morning, everyone. I'm Dominic. To follow up on Sophia's answer, actually responds to that as well. So as you know, about 25,000 educators, so naturally, that's learners, teachers in various entry points. So the good thing about it is we've always done the work prior to all of this happening. So 4 or 5 years, we've always had professional development, and we've already got all the teachers that need to kind of be exposed to this. But the past 4 weeks, yes, we have seen that we have various teachers who are at the very beginning level, if you say so, or for us, we look at the ADKAR, Pro-Sci Change Management model, as our the way we frame our work with teachers from different skills and comfort level. So we do recognize that there's teachers. So in working with the different divisions and departments within the Los Angeles Unified School District, we have professional learning supports that do support those teachers who might need just access around the learning management system, around using different tools and resources. But what's really great about the support that our department, the Instructional Technology Initiative, provides is that we provide that that context to all of this technical learning that the teachers are doing. What's even more amazing is that our partnership has now become more emphasized because of the idea of remote learning, online learning. But in our work on a regular basis, we've always framed it around the idea of global collaboration. So that's sort of like the work that we're doing now, is really emphasizing that this is the great time and space to be looking at how might we get teachers to understand that. Remote online learning is not just about the tools, but also those practices of getting teachers to understand that you can actually work with families, with teachers and with other teachers and students to get this home learning going. And so we take that into account as we design our professional learning, and as we collaborate ourselves, ITI, with the different departments like human resources, information technology division, we do make sure that those continuum of learning is also taken into account.
Yeah, excellent. Thank you. So Kyair, you are closer to the classroom, so you're in a bit of a different position. What kind of supports have you been looking for over the last few weeks, and what have you really seen coming from leadership in Baltimore?
Yeah, so I think that a big thing is really just making sure that all of the teachers feel supported, both in terms of the technology, and we sort of heard that in a few of the answers earlier, right? That teachers want to make sure that our learning curve is where it needs to be so that we can appropriately support the students in Baltimore City. I'm excited and very proud that our CEO or superintendent has made sure that we've had learning packets available. Some of the learning packets are actually picked up by Mensa, which I think is a credit to the folks that were making the learning packets and the quality of those packets, which was pretty impressive to me. Further, we've been able to partner with a public access channel to make sure that some lessons, for example, from Wit and Wisdom, Knowledge on the Go, are provided to students. Public access channel 77. Additionally, the district is also giving out some Chromebooks that they purchased for some students in need. And there are various platforms from Microsoft Teams to Blackboard Collaborate that are available for teachers like me to do what I call live lessons with students sort of in real time, as well as utilize Google Classroom. Throughout all of this, the district has made sure that there's been available professional development online for teachers to access in terms of what are some resources for your own mental health. And I love that there is a bank of resources that are sent to us weekly by our chief of schools, our superintendent, or rather our CEO echoes that we need to make sure that we're attending to our own SEL sort of emotional needs and our own wholeness to make sure that we can appropriately receive kids to do some teaching for them. But I think that the big thing that needs to be underscored is that it's really kind of a learning curve for a lot of folks. I mean, I didn't use a whole lot of technology in my classroom just because, as it was previously said, we are not a one-to-one school, and a lot of schools in Baltimore City are not. So there's a lot of patience in terms of how can we show patience to our parents, our families, and how can they also show patience with teachers as we both navigate transitioning to Google Classroom. I believe it was, sort of, I think it was Michele, or might have been Sophia that said, right, like in a matter of days, right? I was at parent-teacher conferences on Thursday, March 12th, and then we kind of find out in the middle of conferences that Governor Hogan said that we wouldn't be going back to school for 2 weeks, and now obviously it's even longer with a new announcement to come probably sometime during this call. So I think that all of us working together has been said. It's nice knowing that we're not alone. Folks like you all and us here on the panel are willing to engage each other and share resources, because the common denominator is to make sure that all of our kids are good, right? That our families are well, and that we are also taking care of ourselves. So I just appreciate everybody on the panel sharing their expertise, folks in the chat contributing any resources that they have, really so we all can learn together. So thank you to everybody.
Yes, and Kyair, just a quick follow-up from someone in the chat. You mentioned a real-time live lesson resource. Can you just briefly talk about that? What is it?
Yeah, so some teachers are sort of interfacing with students using all kinds of applications. One of them is called Blackboard Collaborate. That's one that we use here in the district. Also, Microsoft Teams has been approved by our district to use. I'm also familiar with several teachers in PLC that I support using an application called Nearpod, Nearpod, and sort of recording their voice over the lesson. And then students kind of will click through the slide so that they can do it at their own pace. But interacting with students is something that I personally miss. So I use the district approved platforms to make sure that I can interact with students in real time as I actually do lessons from our curriculum, as well as integrate some SEL lessons too.
Excellent, excellent. Michele, I wanted to ask what are your long-term or longer-term plans stretching into the summer for ongoing professional development? What does that look like when teachers can't get together in the same room?
I think that's a great question. And one of the, I think, positives that we can try to find the good in a crisis like this is that we are building so much capacity within our staff and our students in a way that would not have been possible without this situation. So while this is absolutely not ideal, I think things can change quite a bit when we get back. And I think this is opening doors for not only changes in the classroom, but changes with professional development. I know that over the last few years, I have, with supporting all of the schools across our district, sometimes it's hard to get into every building on what feels like a really regular basis. And so I've tried to implement, some of this synchronous online professional development, and it's landed less than successful often. And so when we are kind of forced into this situation, I think we're becoming so much more comfortable as a whole staff with learning in different kind of ways. And as an online learning advocate and doing this for a living, I've always firmly believed that we can teach just as well online as we can in a traditional setting. And I think that goes for adults too. And so it's giving us an opportunity to really experience the kinds of connections we can make digitally and remotely. So it's hard to tell what the changes are going to be, especially when we get back. But I'm excited that this has basically opened up a new avenue, a new medium for us to learn and connect in an easier way than if it might be even face-to-face.
Yes, no, that's great. So a similar question over to you, Sophia, about professional development. How do you, it's a question of scale. When you have 25,000 educators, how are you reaching these educators and making sure that they're all kind of receiving the same updates and feeling supported when there's, a limited staff in your group, but so many of them?
Yes, it is a big challenge, and that's been our challenge all along, ensuring that everyone is feeling supported. One thing that we have been able to do in our models of support is create communities of learners. Although we are a centralized function and office, Instructional Technology Initiative under the Division of Instruction, we are also a decentralized system. And that's where those relationships become very important with our local district superintendents. We have 6 that are based geographically within the 720 square miles, which make up LA Unified, ensuring that we have direct communication, those relationships are built within our local districts, and that they're aware of the various opportunities to support their educators in their local district, and really continuing to innovate around these problem of practices. For example, yesterday our superintendent made a very big announcement around a certification that he is sponsoring and supporting and championing for all educators in LA Unified to not only extend their learning right now around what does it mean to teach online, but also how do those practices then transfer to when our school doors reopen in, I don't even know, well, when they open. So that's very exciting. We're looking at different ways, again, to bring all of our various divisions together, we're always better together in LA Unified. So we're really looking forward to the potential that this additional certification that our educators in LA Unified can receive, again, to not only strengthen their existing teaching practices, but what will it look like also forward thinking when the school doors reopen. So we're really excited about the announcement that our superintendent recently made yesterday.
Yeah. Dominic, any follow-up to that, and just supporting just a wide range of educators who probably have different and diverse needs and different support needs?
I think as a follow-up to that would be looking back since the first week of the school closures, really being intentional and strategic about how we were able to just quickly rebound from being offline to now let's take everything and go online. And so with Sophia's leadership, we were able to also work with our chief academic officer so that all the leads within the division of instruction, whether they are in multilingual, multicultural department or arts and sciences, we provided them common professional learning around best practices and pedagogical practices around remote and online learning. So kind of like working with the lead so that they then go and support their own teachers who are within their cadre. And also we already have our EdTech coaches, we call ITFs or Instructional Technology Facilitators, that are assigned in the 6 local districts that Sophia mentioned. And so they support these pilot schools, practitioner schools. And this has been happening for 4 years. And so the idea is we already have planted the seeds from 2015-16. And these are also the same set of educators and education leaders who provide those direct supports in their own context. So essentially is we have the centralized coordination of professional learning, but we are able to tap into localized schools and education leaders and teachers who can then provide what that might look like in this local district, where priority might be instruction in English language learner. And at the same time, we have schools whose technology integration might be in special education. So there's various exemplars that are already in place for us, and we are able to provide face-to-face PD, but also we can direct our teachers to talk to these other people and coaches and provide them actual examples of what that might look like.
That's great. No, thank you. Sophia, we're getting some follow-ups about the certification that you had briefly touched on. Can you talk a little bit more about that? You're on mute, sorry.
Again, it was just announced last night. As LA Unified continues to invest in the growth and development of our educators, we want to ensure that they're ready for anything that may come their way. And this certification program is intended to prepare all of our educators so that our students can not only just access content, but really be truly engaged in the learning. So again, it really resonates with what Michele said earlier around remote learning being doable, as well as being able to be engaged in this high quality instruction, really be able to encompass effective online learning strategies. So educators within the last 4 weeks, 3 weeks actually, had the opportunity to engage in the At-Home Continuity of Learning Professional Development Series, which was hosted by our Division of Instruction, which was a menu of various options where our educators can tap into and be able to learn about their content area and how they are able to leverage dynamic digital tools resources, as well as the pedagogy behind it. It's scheduled to launch May 1st, and it's a quick turnaround from May 1st to June 12th. The application is already open, and it was sent to all of our certificated staff in LA Unified. And teachers will be compensated for completing the additional hours beyond the original 10 hours. They will be compensated for an additional 30 hours of professional development. And it's really going to dig in areas that Again, I mentioned the student engagement, right? How can our educators really deepen their understanding around how to actively engage students in the online learning and utilizing effective pedagogy practices, as well as our families, right? We're hearing so much about how we want to make sure that our families are included in this process. Oops. As well as access and equity. What are those frameworks, methodologies, tools that we can ensure access and equity for all of our students and families? Looking at additional content and resources, and most importantly, our leadership. What does it mean for our leaders now in LA Unified to be able to experience this robust learning online? And what are the supports that our leadership will need? So that's a little bit in a nutshell around our upcoming certification. So stay tuned, and we'd love to share more with you as that starts to evolve.
Yeah, that'd be great. If there's a link or anything that you or Dominic could drop into the chat, I'm sure people would like to, click on that and check it out. We'll also include a link, if we can, in the email that comes as part of the follow-up to this webinar. Kyair, I wanted to touch back in with you. Are there any, how are you connecting with other educators, your peers? Normally, obviously, you'd see them in the teacher's lounge or in the hallway. But are you using Facebook, or are you emailing with them? I mean, how are you staying in touch with other educators and creating a network?
Yeah, I think the big one is is really just making sure that I can use Zoom. So I use Zoom a lot to hold PLC, which is a professional learning community. Some people call it a PLN, a professional learning network. So meeting with people on Zoom, having FaceTime calls, lots and lots of emails, group chats. It's pretty typical ways of staying in touch with people. But I think that the big one is making sure that we're always open and sharing ideas. So, if it's sharing links to a Google Drive folder so that we all can share resources. I saw somebody put in the chat a great link for some amazing resources online. I think the big one is when it's coming to talk to colleagues is, I want to check in to make sure that they are mentally well. So, I mean, a question that I ask my kids as well as, faculty, colleagues, friends is, how are you doing mentally? How are you doing emotionally? Is there anything that I can do to support you? And really just making sure that we're all reassuring each other and all here to just support each other. This is a lot to undertake. Many schools, districts, teachers, families had to do this sort of like almost overnight within a matter of days. So it's certainly not easy. And this wasn't quite the question, but it's something that I'm pretty passionate about, just not only in teaching in Baltimore City, but just teaching in general. There was a lot of issues about equity in terms of who has tech, where are we going? I don't know if this is a conversation for a different webinar, but I do think that with like-minded individuals, there's an opportunity here for us while we are on pause. Unfortunately, the coronavirus is quite the pandemic, and unfortunately, a lot of people have lost their life. I will say that this has also given folks an opportunity to say, what do we really want education to look like when we go back? If we go back to this sort of like, brick and mortar edifice that is a school building, what does that look like? And I think that there's an opportunity for all of us as educators to throw our hat in and say, because there are equity issues that we've always sort of known about, but the building kind of hides that and are really coming to light, now is a good time to dismantle in the best sense who has been benefiting from this system, who has been left behind historically. And this includes students along the gender or the sexuality spectrum, students with disabilities, minority students, especially Black and Brown, that I just think that it's really important for us to think about equity. There's a really good article that I can send to somebody who's got everybody else's email that signed up today. It's called Equity by Design, Equity and then by with an X, Design by Michele Molitor. It's a fantastic article that really just looks at how do we have conversations like these, engage in critical discourse, and then move that conversation to action. So I think that as we're looking at that and students needing to have technology, needing to have, those Chromebooks or whatever it is and access to wireless, if this is a new norm, we are complicit in engaging in inequitable education if not all of our students are able to have some access to education. So while I agree that it's nice, here we are in the 21st century and we're able to do a lot, a lot doesn't mean that everybody has access to that. So I want us to be mindful of how do we reach the most students to do the most good for the longest amount or the best that we can for as long as possible.
Yeah, no, that's a super good point. Michele, we've gotten some questions in the Q&A about, alternate education, continuing ed, and just other, how are you broadening support for non-traditional education in general, and also taking care of this equity piece that Kyair was talking about?
Right. So for us, that piece has actually not been that difficult of a transition for us because several of our alternate education populations are served in a blended environment. So simply moving that location to remote has been an easier transition for those students. We have several alternate programs and schools in our district, and many of those run on student-paced online courses with teachers present. So for us in serving those populations, that hasn't been as difficult as I think it might have been for some other districts. We've just been working really hard in helping to identify access inequities and providing hardware, providing computers and MiFis and resources to make sure that all of our students can be successful. So it's definitely been kind of a joint effort with the leadership in each of the individual schools, and then our IT department in preparing what we call bridging the gap devices. So surplus devices, putting cloud ready on them, so they're essentially like Chromebooks, and making sure that we have that. Fortunately, some preparation that we've done before this, we use surveys to get that kind of information. So we've had, for the last few years, a pretty solid idea of what access has been like in our district, which certainly helped with preparing and making sure that we had the resources available.
Yes, yeah, that's great. So a related question over to you, Sophia and Dominic. I'm not sure which one might be best poised to answer this. For English learning students, what kind of support can you give to those teachers that, are you advising them to do more on video? Are you advising them to do more where they can hear their teacher's voice? I mean, how do you support teachers whose students may not or may be learning English?
So I can speak to that. So a lot of times the past few weeks, that has been sort of like our make sure that we incorporated those best practices that teachers would always do anyway during a regular school day. But I also want to emphasize to Kyair's point around the access and equity piece. And so this is exactly the student population that LA Unified serves. We have about 80% African American and Latino students, a big population of English language learners. So we are just very fortunate that throughout the years that we've always been mindful of emphasizing the importance of access and equity, especially big in our work around computer science instruction, and not just in secondary, but also in elementary schools. So in terms of honoring the students' language and authentic learning experiences or their real life experiences, we've always been emphasizing what that might look like in the work that we do around ISTE Standards implementation, digital citizenship, and computer science education. So to your question around English language learners, how is that possible? So we want to make sure that when we do our PD just recently around global collaboration as the context for online learning, we actually did a literacy lesson as a sample for teachers to be able to see that you can still do read aloud with your kids, because at this point in time, you're probably the positive voice that they need to hear. And so we want to make sure that during our PDs we not only show them these tools and how to turn them on and get kids to join, but also what that might look like to still bring back those human connection aspect to the work. And one of the things we did is that exactly is a lot of teachers, they were like wondering, like, why are we doing read alouds during a PD? But that's exactly the point, is this is one way of you reconnecting back to your students. And I'll invite Sophia to add to it.
Yes, excellent.
Sure.
So we had somebody share a remote learning plan in the chat, and I do want to talk about that for a second. Kyair, did Baltimore provide a remote learning plan, or did you have guidance in like a doc that you could reference, and how was that handled?
Yeah, so I think that a lot of it was, and I think that this is wanting. I think that any teacher can say, I want more, I want more. You know, as a one system of 24 in Maryland, you know, you've got other counties who are starting later, who actually started this week and are going to roll out more next week. You know, Baltimore wanted to get started as early as possible to make sure that any deficit doesn't come back to hurt students. You know, I mean, I reference to my kids when I'm talking to them and families about, you know, we call it the summer slide or brain drain. The same effect is going to be happening now, only on a larger level. So there's research behind this. But Baltimore did have a plan in place. What they did was they moved spring break, which was originally that like first or second week of April, and they moved it to be that second week, that second full week that we were out in March, so that there are no days that we have to make up. We're still going to hit our allotted number of days. But I think that it was really good strategic thinking to say, let's just take a minute. What can teachers be doing right now? And they immediately began printing out packets. Again, I'm not saying that packets are the best thing in the world in terms of education, but I think that we're in a situation where something is better than nothing, so that students are still receiving some contact. Teachers were instructed, you know, to do their best to call families, to talk to them, make sure that they're doing okay. But these were more check-ins around mental and emotional health, that we were going to wait a little bit to push content because students are in various stages. And as the pandemic has grown, a lot of people, and I'm sure some on this call, have actually been touched personally by the pandemic and its harsh effects on humanity. So I think that we really want to be present first before we just start pushing content and these hardline expectations that's difficult for all students to be able to access as if we were in a school building. So hopefully that helps answer that question.
Yeah, no, that's a great jumping off point, especially that they provided you some support around what to focus on socially and emotionally. Michele, can you talk a little bit about how you handle questions? I know that maybe was not part of your job before all this started, because you're a director of virtual and blended learning. So has your job changed to be more social and emotionally minded?
Absolutely. I think all of our jobs have shifted so much. And I think what's been a really important message that we can overlook, and I know it's been important in all of my communications with teachers, is that you're doing enough. Whatever you're doing right now, you're absolutely doing enough. And I think it's important to understand the differences between emergency remote learning and online learning. And so coming from my position, even providing some of that social emotional support for our staff has been really important. I've been doing this for several years, and there are days where I still don't feel like an expert in online learning. It's so different than traditional instruction, and you just can't get up to speed completely in 48 hours. And so I think you are absolutely right in saying, you know, doing something is better than nothing. And so really making sure that while I want us to do the best that we can, and I know that there are things we can do with online learning that can improve the effectiveness of our instruction, ultimately what's really important is that our number one focus are still building those relationships, connecting with students, helping them connect with each other while we're all isolated and trapped in our homes. And so I think while the bulk of my job is still doing what I normally do just on a larger scale, keeping that perspective and making sure that that is at the forefront of everything I do has been absolutely critical.
Yeah. So similar question over to you, Sophia, about social emotional learning and kind of what that looks like in your department.
So, you know, all along, social emotional development, well-being has always threaded through the work that we've brought forth, especially in making the connections to digital citizenship, really making sure that when we design our lessons, our professional development, which then leads our educators to develop their lessons, there's always room for the social emotional aspect to be a part of that learning. Again, like Dominic mentioned earlier, educators for the most part want to come in and start learning the points and clicks right away. We've kind of taken the approach where let's slow down first. Where are you at right now in your learning curve? We've leveraged a triple track approach by Adaptive Schools, the Think Collaborative, where in all of our professional learning, we first go to you as the educator. Where are you at right now in your learning place? Before even we think about implementing this with your students, where are you first on this continuum? Recognizing where that educator might be and where they are ready to go and ready to be experiencing their learning first. So that's been a tenet that we hold very, very closely in all of the design and delivery of our professional development. Again, and to support our learners where they are, because we know that this cannot be a top-down approach. We truly believe that this, where we started about 5 years ago, was really that organic approach to this instructional shifts that we wanted to see. And now due to this crisis, we're still holding true that we want to make sure that the educator checks in with themselves first to really understand, where am I ready right now to activate my learning? So that way, this will then transition when they go back into their learning environment, whether it be they teach other adult learners or they're also teaching their students. So that's been a principle that we've held very closely, and we continue to do so.
Yeah, that's great. Michele, we're getting a few questions about whether this will change learning going forward, even when students are allowed to start coming back to school. Are you finding that teachers are apprehensive about this and feeling like their jobs might permanently change by this experience to remote learning?
I certainly hope not. What I think from our conversations have been really positive. I think what a lot of folks are realizing is that online learning is still a very human kind of teaching. And for this to be effective, it requires, in a lot of ways, even more support and work from the teacher. And that's something that I feel like I've always been adamant about sharing, but I think we're all experiencing it. Students learning, you don't make a connection, you don't build a relationship with a computer, and learning is social and it's relational. And I think that's what so many of us are struggling with now, is having to work so intentionally to maintain those relationships. So no, I don't. If anything, I think this should help us feel assured that our jobs are pretty robot proof at this point. And I do think that I'm looking forward to coming back into our traditional spaces. Online learning, we've always felt strongly in our district, is an important pathway to success for some students. It's not the best way for all students, but we can definitely leverage some of the strengths, some of the things that we're learning in this area, and bring it back into our traditional settings to really kind of transform what learning looks like. I think when we use online learning in our traditional environments, in our traditional classrooms, we can use it in a sense to clone ourselves, add another teacher in the room, making sure that we can work in small groups, build those relationships, personalize, individualized instruction, and then that independent work that happens in our classroom doesn't have to be just practice. It can be instruction and assessment. And I think we're building the skills now that's going to make that possible when hopefully we come back in the fall. So I think that it's an exciting future for education.
That's great. Kyair, we did get some comments about, teachers feeling like they're doing more work now, nonstop work hours, potentially burning out. How are you keeping that work-life balance? Any organizational strategies to kind of share?
Yeah, I mean, honestly, I really just want to echo what Michele was saying earlier about, if whatever it is that you're doing, it is more than enough. And I think that if you are hopping on the various video platforms that are approved by your district, or you're checking in with your students on Class Dojo, or sending just like a funny flip grid or whatever it happens to be, even if it's just checking in with your students 2-3 times a week, that's a great start. You know, I don't think that the expectations that, for me, I teach 75-minute classes and I'm teaching 3 75-minute classes. That's different. Students are in different spaces where, you know, there are going to be various, you know, families or siblings, right, kind of competing for maybe some technology. But I would say that by and large, I think that teachers' hearts are in the right place, and that the work that we're doing is good work. Yes, there's some apprehension. You know, I think that what teachers are doing is a lot. You know, and I'm fortunate that I'm in a position, right, where I can do a live lesson every day, touch base with students, and still get on calls. But I mean, that doesn't mean that I'm not busy with video calls or jumping on for this meeting or that. It certainly can be stressful, and I admit that there are times when it feels like I'm busier now at home than I was in the school building. But I also know that I'm doing good work and that students are potent motivators. So I think educators are a very fortunate bunch, as Michele was saying, that we are needed. These relationships are real and they have true lasting consequences. So while it's not easy to uproot and go from a building to online, I do think that what we're doing is real work. I'm excited to get back into the building as soon as we can, but I also recognize that we want to be safe and smart too.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's great. Dominic, do you have any advice for listeners and attendees who are thinking about their digital learning plans and how to update them over the next few weeks for teachers and kind of what to put in them as this evolves toward the summer?
I think as what LA Unified is currently doing, side by side with the professional development plan for our educators, we also have been supporting parents and families. And it's really important to bring that aspect of parents and families, and how might we also get them to be part of that plan to make sure that as these school closures go on, we are able to make sure that we are engaging them in the education of the students. And it might not be formalized education, but at the same time, it's still something to bring parents to know what is going on with the kids and their teachers. And at the same time, what that might look like when we do return to the physical space of our classrooms. And it really brings to light the need to engage parents in their own learning, and how might we address issues such as language barrier, socioeconomic barriers, and how can we still bring parents and families in the classroom, or we bring them online just like right now. The other aspect of it as well is the need to do this work with partners. We are fortunate enough to have our professional learning partners, the Instructional Technology Initiative, but this past few weeks have really shown how important it is to bring community partners, even content curriculum partners, and really work with them to ensure that the products and the content that is being put out there really address the needs of the families. To everyone's point is, this is not just shoving down content to teachers to make sure that they still do the regular teaching of math, science, and all of these subject areas, but to still be able to also address those real life experiences that the students are going through right now. And that is really something that we are seeing in LA Unified, knowing what our student population is.
Yeah, that's great. Michele, do you have any plans for how is the school year going to wrap up? Are you thinking that far ahead and kind of transitioning both students and teachers kind of into what might be a longer summer break?
Well, I mean, everything's on the table, and at this point, we talk in our district that things change every 6 hours. Like, we're having to quickly adapt those plans. So in the state of Indiana, they've already closed schools for the rest of the year, so we're working remotely for the rest of the school year. As far as graduation ceremonies go, we tentatively still have them on the calendar in the summer. Who knows? I don't have a crystal ball to be able to tell whether we're going to actually physically be able to do that. I know that there are already conversations in higher ed and across the state about, the possibility of us not being able to start this school year. So it's really up in the air. I wish I had more concrete answers. It's really just about kind of being agile and flexible right now and making adjustments as we go to ensure that everyone's safe.
Yeah. And do you find that teachers are responding well to this kind of ever-shifting environment and that they have the flexibility that we all need right now?
Well, I guess we're all adjusting as best as you can in a situation like this. We're definitely all figuring it out together. I think it's been really important in our district just to maintain transparency from leadership and effective communication. We're kind of taking the stance that you can't over communicate enough. So just trying to keep everybody on the same page. It's been nice to see how, as a whole, the staff has really kind of been in this together and maintained a positive outlook. I think that you could easily respond to a situation like this with a lot of anxiety and anger and frustration. And I think I've been really pleasantly surprised by just how open everyone has been to whatever comes our way.
Yeah, that's great. So Sophia, I know that LAUSD has used that ISTE standards somewhat in helping prepare teachers. How have those been useful during a situation like this?
They've been extremely useful. They provide the framework for all of our professional development. The two standards that are most relevant for today's times, Global Collaborator, which Dominic mentioned earlier, and Digital Citizen. Those two standards really hone in on anything our educators are doing right now in this moment in time by unpacking those standards, making connections to their work, their content areas that they are already delivering can be made really seamlessly. The good thing that we've been able to do, I see it as something that's positive when we were the first district in the nation to adopt the ISTE standards back in 2016, is that we immediately embraced them and started to design professional learning opportunities that were really connected to what educators were teaching in the classroom. So we were able to ask educators to join us for 2+1 consecutive evenings where we first unpack the standard and to, what does that really mean? What might it be able to look like within your context? The second night, come back and bring a lesson that's relevant to what you're going to be teaching soon. Design around that content, take it back, test it out, and then come back and share with your peers. So now creating a repository of other lessons that their community of learners has been able to create. So that's really been the foundation, not only the ISTE standards for students, but then the ISTE standards for educators, and now, which are very, very relevant, the education leader standards. Now that we have our educator leaders really delving into what online learning looks like, that framework, it can really provide guidance for our educators at this time.
Yeah, that's great. Dominic, just to throw it over to you, anything to add to what Sophia was saying?
I think definitely that language of the ISTE standards, as we now work with the entire district, ITI is just one of the departments within the Division of Instruction. So we do the professional learning around instructional technology district-wide, but as we collaborate, cross-stitch, and work with all these other content area departments and leaders at the district level, it really gives us a focused set of conversations with these different leaders who are coming from different content perspective. And it brings us together to have one common plan for the rest of the year.
Yeah, that's great. Michele, I had a question. We were talking earlier about sharing resources. How do you make sure that teachers see and are sharing resources amongst themselves, and that they're kind of familiarizing themselves with things that they need without kind of overwhelming them?
Well, for us, when we're organizing our support, we have worked across departments to kind of centralize as much information as possible. So because there is so much information and it is constantly changing, we go back to our remote learning plan, which is a working document that houses everything. So it's like kind of that one-stop shop. When it comes to professional learning options, we are working with our curriculum instruction assessment team, with our social emotional learning team, with all of those departments and condensing that into one space. So creating those centralized locations has been really critical. And then we've also been encouraging kind of those smaller group collaboration. So we're helping our grade level teams and our departments work together digitally to share the workload of designing digital content, creating those spaces for them to collaborate in a more localized fashion. So I think those have been our major approaches to that.
Yeah. I had earlier said that you were mainly, using district approved tools to connect with students. Are you finding that, can you talk about the balance between, following district approved and, also what you're seeking out on your own and just what you personally think is best for your students?
Yeah, I think like a big one for me is making sure that one, we're following the district guidelines for the safety and the online security of students. I think that as much as we want to attend to their emotional health or their social and emotional health, we also want to make sure that students are not in a situation where their online security or their online safety is compromised, right? It's still our job as teachers to protect them inside the classroom. And I believe just because the classroom is virtual, that protection doesn't stop. So we still want to ensure that. Somebody had asked in the chat, and this question really gets to what was, sort of posed in the chat is, I really want to keep things simple for families. So if I'm using one platform to sort of interact with students via video or a live lesson again, as I call them, I just want to stick to that one platform. Google Classroom is the platform that I use to give additional announcements and updates to students where I post work, where work should be turned in. But I also make it available that, for instance, you need to meet some students where they are. If their parent sends me their work by text message, that's fine. If you want to email me the work, that's cool. I've even had students, find my teacher account and they send me the work on Instagram. Like, as long as the work is being sort of done, there's effort being attended to, that's fine. But what I've cautioned and told students is I want you to worry less about the work and make sure that your social, mental, and emotional health is where it needs to be so that you're in a space to be able to contribute. Because it's been mentioned that, some students in Baltimore have to share a single device, across the entire day to do some of the work. So I want to make sure that we're being fair to students in terms of the work that we're asking them to do while they're also at home, okay? But my big thing is really just keep it simple. I was not a teacher that used a whole lot of tech before. We're using it now just because of the one-to-one ratio. We just didn't have that. So use a platform and stick with that platform. For me, use the platform for the live lessons, and I use Google Classroom. Anything outside of that, I just don't want to complicate. You also want to make sure that if they're offering you, skills, because a lot of folks have said, oh, I can get this free or that free. Make sure that it's research-based or evidence-based. Make sure that it might be skill or content aligned to the curriculum or the standards that your state or district uses. There's a lot of free handouts out there, and I think it's great that companies are offering these, but I also think that we want to be putting good content in front of students for them to engage with and interact with to build that sort of cache of skills. So when we do come back, we can also sort of flatten any learning deficits that might have taken place while we're not in the school building.
Yeah, that's great. So we're about to wrap up in a minute, but Sophia, I just wanted to ask you a last question. I heard a lot of flexibility in Kyair's response that students and parents can, contact him in various ways. Does this how do you respond to an approach that's that flexible? How does that work for a district like yours?
I'm glad Kyair shared that, because that's what I've been seeing also, in this time of, and I'm going to quote Michele, I love it, emergency remote learning. I think that, where we can meet our families, that is what we need to do first and foremost. We need to meet the human needs first, because everyone's scenario is different. yes, on one hand, we do have platforms and systems available up and running, but at the same time, we do need to understand that if for whatever reason we're not able to access one certain pathway, that there's other opportunities. So, you know, I welcome that, and I'm just so grateful for all of our educators who are thinking of these multiple modes, but at the same time, still being very mindful about our student data privacy. You know, that cannot be compromised. So at the same time, you know, we welcome educators to engage in these dialogues with us. How might we be able to support them and to continue to support their families, again, where they might be, but really building up our family and parent support so that they're able to access the information in real time and be able to have those conversations with their teachers. So I welcome it, and at the same time letting them know we do have systems, and I think a lot of it has to do with, well, if we have the system, are we not being able to communicate that effectively for our parents and our families to be able to access that? So, you know, that's on us. We need to do a better job of that for our parents, and we look forward to doing that.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you so much, everybody, again, for attending, and a huge thanks to our webinar panelists, Dominic, Kyair, Michele, and Sophia, again, for lending your time and your insights. I'm Stephen Noonoo. I'm the K-12 editor at EdSurge, and we provide the latest resources and news about how technology is shaping the ways we learn and teach. You can sign up for our free newsletters or find out more resources at edsurge.com. To check out more of our webinars, please go to edsurge.com/e/webinars. Please look out for the email that will be coming next week with the recap and everything. And thank you so much, and have a great afternoon, everyone.
Thank you.